TIFU by ruining my country's National Art Museum's main exhibit.
So back in year 9 to 10ish we went on a school excursion to the National Art Museum in Canberra to go see all the art and take photos of stuff for an assignment. One of the activities we were required to do was to find images in Jackson Pollock's famous blue poles. Everyone except me couldn't see how a random slather and glob of paint could possibly be a koala, so to help my fellow pupils I kindly pointed towards where this image is on this giant artwork. Only I didn't point, I accidentally touched it, and if you've ever seen this painting or any of Pollock's work in person you'd know that the giant globs of paint don't ever fully dry inside. So there I'm standing in the middle of arguably the most expensive painting in Australia with blue paint from a wet paint glob bubble I accidentally touched with about 400 to 500 people staring at me like I just murdered someone in public.
To top it all off, I also set off a proximity alarm, which was the loudest alarm I've ever heard. Think jewelry heist, diamond stealing alarm. Got my entire school banned. I got kicked out of my German elective and had a school assembly about it too. Worst part is now, even years later, you're no longer even permitted to even enter the same room the painting is displayed in. I went back years later and the entire room is gated off like a crime scene. TLDR touched Jackson Pollock's blue poles on an excursion and smudged it, causing an entire school to be escorted to the exit and the exhibit to be permanently barred even decades later.
I don't want to be a killjoy or like dox myself, but I work in the field of paintings movements and have had hands-on experience with this work. You didn't ruin it, so don't feel bad, and it isn't roped off into another room. That's called a temporary exhibitions changeover. The painting is being conserved as an early-ish example of large-scale acrylic, mixed media painting to see how the paint behaves as it ages and also to clean the surface of dirt. Also, the gallery doesn't ban schools BC, they're an optional part of the national excursion curriculum. But this happened when you were in year 9, so I don't expect you to remember or know all that. Had something similar happening in Rotterdam. On a school trip we visited a museum who had an art installation literally on the floor with nothing to bar it from walking on it. So as distracted as I was, I walked straight through that piece of work, got yelled at and people went berserk. All I could bring up to say was that it wasn't very clever to put artwork on the floor now, is it? Weary face, smiley face. Not my proudest moment. With a single stroke of a finger, Op is now a contributing artist on a famous Pollock work. Cash in on this. Reminds me of the time I tripped and knocked over a cardboard display of Stephen King novels. Got my entire book club banned from the Barnes & Noble.
Just googled it. I can't see the koala either. What year? Because it's been on constant display for over 20 years. Minus a cleaning a few years ago. Years ago I was at a certain world-famous European art museum with my mother and she was admiring a painting and says, "Look at this amazing color," and without thinking just reached out and touched a 300-plus-year-old painting. I was horrified and looked all around, but there was no security in sight and apparently no one watching on camera. This was about 25 years ago. And maybe security is heavier now. But it was nothing like what you see in major American museums. I like the idea of ruining a Pollock by smudging it. Absurd. You are an unluckier version of me. I also went on a school trip to Canberra. Ouse 10 years ago. We too as a class, in our school uniforms, visited the National Gallery of Australia. While walking around I was so mesmerized by a large painting that I started walking backwards with my sight on the painting, totally unaware of which direction I was backing towards when my heel hit a platform and I fell on my ass on the ground. It was a sculpture piece displayed on a mounted platform with no barricade around. The fall felt 10 hours long. I can feel my heart pounding. I started looking frantically around. I can see all the faces lit up with horror staring at me. But later during that trip we came back to the gallery a second time, and while I was walking around with my friends more carefully this time, my friend walked right up to a painting and pointed at it real close that the guard had to yell, Across the room SSTTTOOOOOPP. From that point on, whenever we entered a new section, a different guard would watch us closely and made it super obvious to glare at us. It was a fun trip.
Mr. Bean, is that you?
Were you stupid for touching it? Yes. Was the museum also stupid for leaving their most valuable painting within touching distance? Knowing irresponsible high schoolers are doing tours? Also yes. TBF, it's a terrible display if a kid is able to just casually touch it by accident. Oh man, I had a similar thing when I was a toddler. I apparently felt passionately about a Van Gogh painting and sprinted over to it and PPED both my hands onto it. Family wasn't thrown out, but we had 2 guards shadowing us closely for the rest of the visit. You improved it, it's utter bollocks. This needs to be added to the Wikipedia entry. I'm not banned, but I did get several dirty looks when I tripped on the barrier protecting a floor installation of a 4-foot vulva and fell at my city's modern art museum. There is no way a 1952 Pollock could have any wetness in its paint. But thanks for the story. Oops. Spelling. When I go to this sentence. Only I didn't point, I accidentally touched it. And if you've ever seen this painting or any of Pollock's work in person, you'd know that the giant globs of paint don't ever fully dry inside. I whispered, "Oh, no," with a very exaggerated, "Oh, no," face. In all my time reading TIFUs, I never did that before. I don't even like Pollock's work, and I'm very sure there are no images within those globs. You made it more interesting and expensive. They should rename it The Curiosity of Youth. You are forever part of the story of this painting. If the painting is still around in hundreds of years, the fact that you touched it could conceivably be told to the people who are looking at it. I bought a cheap painting on Masonite at a thrift store because I wanted a piece of board to paint on, and it turned out to be from a somewhat famous painter named Utrillo and might be worth loads of money before I got a bunch of paint on it.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Ericast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.